Good morning, everybody. So I want to talk today about how to performance ride your Harley. It's something that you've seen for years in my videos now, and it's getting pretty popular online. People are talking about going and actually riding a Harley, peg to peg, let's call it. And I don't know, at least when I started riding 10 years ago now, plus, it didn't seem like there were as many people. I don't want to say doing it. I mean, there might have been just as many people doing it, but there's less people advertising it, let's put it that way. So I kind of self-taught myself some certain things, and I'm hoping that my 10 years experience might be able to help you. We will see. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. You're a good man. So the first things first. Before you decide to performance ride your Harley, by that I just mean, like I said earlier, peg to peg, right? Hard in the corners, fast out of the straightaway, stuff like that. You gotta remember, it is not a sport bike. This is the number one thing you need to remember. If you're coming from a sport bike, this is especially pertinent to you. Alright? Don't try to be Rossi on the thing, because this is in comparison to a sport bike, a big, heavy, long wheelbase bike. It doesn't turn in as fast. It definitely doesn't lean as far. The suspension setup, I don't care what you do to the suspension, the chassis suspension setup will never be quite as good as a sport bike. There's a lot of factors, so just keep that in mind. However, you can have an absolute ball riding these things hard. I almost think you might have more fun just because you're not going breakneck speeds on public roads to do it. Anyway, so the first things first, bike setup. This is pretty critical. You can push a stock bike and have fun, but it just gets a little sketchy. Things are bouncing around. You're scraping stuff that you don't want to scrape. It gets weird. So, first things first, if you haven't bought a bike yet, buy a more performance-oriented model to begin with. So, Harley did make quite a few over the years performance-oriented bikes. If you go way back to the 80s, you have the FXR S-SP, the FXR-T, the touring one with the fairing. Both of those had taller suspension. They were just set up in a way that they were made to handle better from the factory. Hold on, we'll rip this turd quick. Yeah, I got a bad line in that. Oh, yeah. Terrible line. Those bikes were set up to handle. The Dyna FXDX, taller suspension, adjustable preload, and I think it might even have rebound and compression. They were meant to handle. Now keep in mind, none of these bikes out of the box are going to handle super, super well, except for the last one here. But the Sportster Sport, back in the, 99 to 03 maybe, the Sportster Roadster, what I'm on, the Dyna Lowrider Sport, yeah, like 2016, 17, 18, somewhere around there. And then now the new Softails, the new M8 Softails, the Lowrider S and the Lowrider ST, by far the best handling Harleys out of the box. Absolutely incredible. Well, at least as far as bigger bikes. Maybe the XR 1200, that's a good bike to buy. A Buell. Buell is really more of a sport bike, despite the Sportster engine, in my opinion. And the wheelbase and stuff proves it. But anyway, so yeah, I would say those Dynas, the couple Sportsters I mentioned, and then the new Softails are really going to be where you want to be. Now listen, if you want to jack a touring bike up and performance ride that, go for it. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't performance ride any other Harley. I'm just giving you options that are going to be probably a little better at it out of the box and need less modification. If you got let's say you just got an FXD, you just got a nice Dyna Super Glide, regular Dyna. Dude, throw some nice suspension on it. If you're feeling a little spendy, put a little taller forks on it, and that'll handle great too. I mean, Harley didn't do a ton to these bikes, they just put a little better suspension on them. So don't think that just because you have a fat boy, alright, yeah, a fat boy is only ever going to handle so well, an older model one anyway. But, you can do things to it and make it better. And guess what? You can still have fun even with your limited lean angles and stuff. So the other big thing, though, that the bikes that I mentioned give you is dual front dual front rotors, dual front calipers. So you have three total brakes, and it makes a noticeable difference. And the best way I can explain this to you is, I was on the Lowrider Sport at Americade, and I was riding it pretty hard, as you can see in the video. And God, this road is so freaking bumpy. I was diving into a corner a little too fast, and so I was like, oh, I need a handful of brake. And so I got on the brakes, and the bike came right down, slowed down, and got into the turn, and I was good to go. I was on the street bob right after that, which has a single front rotor, and it did okay, but you really could feel the braking difference. I mean, you had to bury your hand in that lever much more to get the same stopping power, and that in and of itself is okay, because the stopping power is there, at least for slower speeds. But when you get up to higher speeds is when you really want the extra rotor, and for repetitive use. I was in the Appalachians with this bike, probably 3-4 years ago now, and I rode this one downhill mountain road so hard, I faded all of my brakes, all 3 rotors were just faded right out, which I would not have done that in retrospect. I just didn't know what was happening. So yeah, braking is super important, guys, super important. If you like the looks of a single rotor, they make big rotor kits that give you the performance of 2 rotors, and it only stays on one side of the wheel. That's an option. Or if you have a Dyna or a touring bike or anything, or a Sportster, they have the option for the second disc. I believe all the wheels are drilled for them. If not, you might have to get cast wheels. So, you'll have to figure that one out. But there are options out there. Again, depending on your starting bike, this just might cost you a little more or less money. Another thing with the bike setup, exhaust. Now, I have the regular stock exhaust with slip-ons, and you will drag the ever-loving crap out of it. I can show you, there's skid marks all over this exhaust. I'm personally okay with that, it doesn't bother me. If you're not okay with that, get yourself a 2-in-1, preferably just because you get a little better power too off the ground. Just because you get a little better power too. Just get one that's high off the ground. I love Thunder headers. They're probably the first 2-in-1s that ever existed, but I believe they hang just low enough that they will scrape. Somebody correct me on that if I'm wrong, so just keep that in mind. Stealth, Thrashin, these companies are, just to name a couple, are companies that are making stuff for performance Harleys that are meant to lead. So just choose your exhaust wisely if you don't already have one. Peg choice. So my pegs don't have the feelers. A lot of the newer Harleys do. That's probably preferable. I've worn mine so far down, the feelers are useless at this point, or would be useless at this point if I had them. But feelers would be good. You start to feel that peg hit, and then you got a little bit more room until you run out of lean angle. So that's a good idea. Now, other than that, compared to a sport bike, Harleys, you have to, when you downshift, you have to rev match. So if you're in a performance ride in the corner, you really need to learn how to rev match, or you're going to have a very hard time setting your bike up at a good RPM and without skidding the rear tire. So that's as simple as pulling in the clutch, revving the throttle, and then letting the clutch out where are you going, brother? In a smooth enough motion to where you don't let the RPMs of the engine fall before you re-engage the clutch. So it's literally just clutch, rev, downshift, let out. And that's a rev match. On a motorcycle, it's pretty easy to do. A car's a little bit harder. That's a really important skill. You've seen me do that 1,000 times, coming into corners. You'll have to rev match 3 years sometimes. And then you're where you need to be. So just get that skill down pat. Now you can also rev match through gears. You can just rev match once for 3 gears, but I don't usually do that. Not that you can, but sorry, buddy. Gotta get in front of you. You got no room. So ready? 1, 2. This corner is like a 2 or 3 gear rev match. Lean off the bike, set yourself up, look through the corner. Now I'm like a couple inches above my exhaust. We're gonna get interrupted. But if you notice, I slid myself off the bike there. And with a Harley, because the lean angles are so low compared to like a sport bike, that's pretty critical. If you want to remotely keep up with sport bikes, and let me break this news to you, you're not going to keep up. You're just going to be less behind if you have a really skilled rider. But if you want to have any sort of fighting chance, you got to get your butt off that freaking seat. And on a Harley, because of the weight of the chassis, I find that I don't know, I just feel like I have more control over the bike. I'm a little closer to the ground. The center of gravity changes, and I feel like I'm safer. And if I were to hit a road debris, I'd have better ability to control the bike, and get it back up. So I really, really encourage you to get comfortable and learn. And I'm talking half a butt cheek. You don't have to be crazy off the seat, just enough to kind of set yourself up to your body position's good. When you're in this really upright riding position, especially with bar risers like I have, and like a lot of these guys are riding T-bars like on the club style bikes, so their hands are up here. It's fine, and it's really great when you're cruising. Oh my God, it's so comfortable. But in the corners, it's kind of a disadvantage, right? You really want lower bars. So you can kind of sort of emulate that by just getting your butt off the seat and letting your body go in that lower bar position, like where your body would be if the bars were lower. And then your hands are up high, so you're kind of like looking at your own hand. But it works. It sounds kind of weird, but it does work. So I highly encourage you to do that. And it'll help you start to corner faster and more comfortably. For me anyway, and this is just me I guess, but there's something about being on a Harley leaned over to the exhaust with my body just straight up and down, or with leaning with the bike, and I'm uncomfortable with it. Not uncomfortable, but I'm proportionally less comfortable than if I'm leaning off the seat. That's a big thing for me. Now another thing you need to remember, these bikes don't have a lot of RPM range. Sport bike, you got 14,000 RPM. You can rev that thing to the freaking moon coming out of a corner. On a Harley, if you don't put your cornering gear just right, you're going to have to shift mid-corner, which is a big no-no if you're at full lean angle. Really not a great idea, unless you're very smooth on the clutch. And even then, you're going to unload the suspension and stuff. You just really shouldn't do it. So with that being said, you really need to pick a cornering gear that's not necessarily the lowest gear you can be in, but is a gear that will let you exit the turn and be at red line or under red line. So I might enter a corner at 2,700 RPM, and you're like, wow, that's really low. But with a bike that only revs to 6, if it's a long sweeping corner and maybe it has an increasing radius, i.e. it gets shallower toward the end, I need RPM, because when I go to crank the throttle, I need room for that bike to be able to climb and not run out of gear before I'm at a point where I can comfortably shift. And we're also not on a freaking racetrack, so you don't need the absolute maximum speed. If I were on a racetrack, I don't know, maybe you take the risk of an in-corner shift, but you might be on slicks and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I really think that for your street riding, average Joe, try to minimize your in-corner shifts, and definitely don't apex shift the freaking motorcycle, please. Because Harleys don't get that upset mid-lean angle because they don't have super big lean angles. Actually, I might stay here. But they will definitely get a little bit cranky. So you got to keep that in mind. If I play my cards right, I can sneak behind this woman because she's going to gun it. I guarantee it. Might do that if this truck doesn't gun it. Let's see, what else? Highway pegs, make sure they're adjusted if you have them high enough that they're not constantly freaking dragging. I would hit this mount, the actual mount to the highway peg, when I had it adjusted differently. That felt kind of weird in the middle of a corner. It was a nice sharp bang, and that could upset the bike, so you don't want to do that. Yeah, the shifting thing. Oh, loading the front end. So a cruiser has a lot less weight on the front tire than a sport bike, which is good and bad. It's nice because you can really brake hard into a corner, not worried about going into a stoppie. But you also can't brake as hard into a corner because you don't have as much weight on the front tire. So keep that in mind. And then, more importantly, if you have a real sharp corner and you want to get really low on it, make sure you've got your body as far forward as reasonably possible. Because I've had it happen. That front tire, if you start to roll out of the apex of a corner, that front tire will unload a little bit, and it's not that scary, but you will start start to wash out just a little bit. Like, I don't even want to say wash out, but the front end of the bike, your turning circle gets longer. So if you're at a really high lean angle and you're right on the yellow line, you could cross over. So you don't want to do that. So just make sure you load that front tire up the best you can. And a trick to doing that is you can actually use a process called trail braking. Look it up online for an explanation, but you're basically braking pretty deep into the corner, and that just helps keep weight on the front end, and it just helps keep the chassis settled, kind of squished into the road. And it does make a difference on Harleys. Like, you wouldn't think you need to do it because it's a bike that doesn't have a lot of lean angle, but it keeps the bike from getting upset, especially if you hit some mid-corner bumps. So I really do encourage you to learn it. Just be careful, because riding your brakes into the start of a turn is definitely an advanced rider skill. And keep in mind, guys, by the way, let me caveat this whole video with this. I'm not an expert. I've got some professional training, and I'm mostly self-taught. So just keep that perspective in mind. You've seen me do what I do on my bike, and I have a lot of fun doing it, but I don't claim to be an expert. What else we got? Just trying to think here. Lane positioning. Even if you miss the apex a little bit, stay to the outside of turns, at least especially if you're in areas with a lot of trees, because it will give you so much more visibility around that corner. Guys, you gotta make sure that you can see where you're going, because if you can't see where you're going and something jumps out at you, oh man, you're in for deep trouble. If you're full lean angle, and you're something jumps out at you on the road, it's tough. It's very, very hard to slow that bike down. A car, you can mash the brakes and probably slow down. A bike is difficult. So make sure you go slow enough through corners that are blind that you have time to stop. That will bite you in the butt. And this is just a general thing. You really shouldn't cross over double solids in mid-corner. Bikes, not only because it's the other path of travel for cars, but bikes get unhappy over paint lines. And if you're at full lean angle, they get really unhappy over paint lines sometimes. So keep that one in mind. But, yeah. I think that pretty much sums it up. Just a little quick recap. That's a nice M car. Quick recap. Learn your downshifting, your rev matching. Practice hard braking. Practice. Go on a straight road, 50 mile an hour, 60 miles an hour, brake down to 0. And just get harder and harder and harder until you really hear the tires yelling at you. That's a good thing to know for braking into corners. Get comfortable with the bike's lean angles. Set your suspension up for success. Try to buy, if you don't have a bike yet, try to buy a little bit taller, more performance-oriented bike. Dual front rotor. Yeah. I don't know. I think that's we pretty much summed it up. All right, guys. As always, thanks for watching. God bless America, and I'll see you on the next one.